My name is Justice Lane and I'm 32 years old. Today I watched my parents' faces turn ashen as they stood in my corner office staring at the awards on my wall. These same parents who laughed when I asked for help with homework, who mocked my college dreams, saying, "You'll never make it without us." For years, their ridicule was my shadow. But now, as they stammered apologies, I realized I'd built something they couldn't take credit for my life. Before I share my story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and subscribe if you've ever had to prove someone wrong. Growing up in the pristine suburbs of Boston, my childhood looked perfect from the outside. Our two-story colonial with its manicured lawn and my father's luxury sedan in the driveway projected the image my parents worked tirelessly to maintain. My father, Thomas Lane, built his reputation as a cutthroat corporate attorney, while my mother, Diane, managed the administrative operations at Massachusetts General Hospital. They were respected professionals, always competing with colleagues for promotions and with neighbors for status symbols. I was their only child, their Justice, a name my father chose because he claimed it commanded respect in a courtroom. But from my earliest memories, I never quite fit the mold they had designed. Where they were analytical and practical, I was creative and sensitive. They processed the world through logic and competition. I saw it through emotion and connection. This fundamental difference became the root of years of misunderstanding and pain. The first time I realized something was wrong was in second grade. My class had started learning multiplication tables, and while other children seemed to grasp the concept quickly, I struggled. One evening I gathered my courage and approached my father in his home office clutching my math workbook. "Dad, can you help me with multiplication?" "I don't understand it," I asked, my voice small. He looked up from his legal briefs, irritation flashing across his face, before it transformed into something worse, amusement. He laughed, not the warm laughter of a father enjoying his child, but the cold, dismissive laugh that would become my most consistent inheritance. "If you can't figure out simple multiplication, Justice, you'll never survive in the real world," he said, turning back to his papers. "Figure it out yourself." My mother, standing in the doorway with a cup of coffee for my father, nodded in agreement. "Your father's right, Justice. You need to figure things out yourself. Independence is important." I retreated to my room, confused and hurt. At 8 years old, I couldn't understand the difference between independence and abandonment. That night I stayed up until midnight, tears silently streaming down my face as I repeated multiplication facts over and over, terrified of disappointing them again. This became my first coping mechanism. Hide the struggle, pretend to understand, figure it out alone, no matter the cost. I learned quickly that in my parents' eyes, needing help was a character flaw. Self-sufficiency wasn't just encouraged, it was demanded, and failure to achieve it resulted in mockery and disappointment. The rare moments of connection with my parents only came when I succeeded without their assistance. When I was 10, I created a science fair project on ecosystems that won first place. As we drove home from the awards ceremony, my father glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "See, you don't need help when you actually try," he said, his words framed as a compliment but landing like an accusation of previous laziness. My mother reached back to pat my knee. "We always knew you could do it if you applied yourself properly." Their backhanded praise reinforced the toxic cycle. Succeed alone or be mocked for asking. Each interaction cemented my belief that I was fundamentally flawed for needing guidance, that my natural inclination to seek connection and help was a weakness I needed to overcome. For my 11th birthday, my parents gave me a desk for my bedroom, positioning it to face the wall to minimize distractions, my father explained. It became a lonely island where I taught myself everything from algebra to world geography, determined to avoid their ridicule. My mother would occasionally check my completed homework, not to offer assistance, but to verify I'd done it correctly. When I made mistakes, she would sigh and say, "Justice, other children your age don't need this much oversight." By the time I finished elementary school, I'd constructed an elaborate system to appear self-sufficient. I'd research topics before they were taught in class, so I'd never be caught not knowing an answer. I'd arrive at school early to ask teachers questions so my parents wouldn't see me struggling. I spent recesses in the library instead of playing, trying to stay ahead of expectations. The price of this facade was my childhood itself. While other kids built friendships and explored their interests, I was constructing protective walls against the next potential mockery. I became hypervigilant, always anticipating criticism, always preparing defenses. At night, I would sometimes whisper questions into my pillow, imagining what it would be like to have parents who answered with patience instead of derision. The summer before middle school, my parents hosted a neighborhood barbecue. As the adults gathered on our deck drinking wine, I overheard my father talking to our neighbor, a professor at Boston University. The key to raising a successful child is teaching them early that the world won't hold their hand, my father said authoritatively. Justice has learned that asking for help is the last resort, not the first option. She's better for it. As I carried a tray of appetizers past them, my neighbor smiled at me kindly. Your parents are very proud of how independent you are, Justice. I smiled back, the perfect daughter, while inside I was screaming a truth no one could hear. I wasn't independent. I was abandoned in plain sight, drowning while everyone complimented my swimming technique. Middle school arrived with a tsunami of new challenges. Suddenly I was navigating changing classes, complex social hierarchies, and increasingly difficult academics. For most kids, this transition came with increased parental guidance. For me, it brought even higher expectations of self-sufficiency and more creative forms of mockery when I failed to meet them. In 7th grade, algebra introduced abstract concepts that my concrete thinking struggled to grasp. After receiving a failing grade on my first quiz, I spent hours trying to understand the material before reluctantly approaching my father in his study one evening. "Dad, I'm having trouble with algebra. Could you look at this problem with me?" I asked, balancing my textbook and notebook carefully in my arms. He swiveled in his leather chair, looking annoyed at the interruption. "Figure it out or fail, Justice, those are your options." When I didn't immediately leave, he continued, "What do you think will happen in the real world when you can't solve a problem? Will you always have someone to run to? My mother ever." His echo added from the doorway, "Justice, you're too dependent. Other kids don't need this much handholding. We're preparing you for the real world." I nodded and retreated, familiar shame burning my cheeks. That night I stayed up until 3:00 in the morning teaching myself algebra from online videos with the volume turned low so they wouldn't hear. I passed the next quiz, not because I fully understood the material, but because I'd memorized similar problem patterns. As academic struggles mounted, so did social ones. The energy I should have used building friendships was consumed by my secret academic struggles. I became increasingly isolated, unsure how to navigate the complex social world of middle school without guidance. When other girls formed tight friendship groups, I hovered on the periphery, afraid any social misstep would confirm my parents' view of my fundamental inadequacy. At 14, I discovered writing through an English assignment that asked us to keep a journal. For the first time, I found something that came naturally, something that made sense of my chaotic internal world. I poured my unspoken thoughts onto the page, creating stories where young protagonists found mentors who guided them patiently. My English teacher, Mrs. Bennett, wrote encouraging comments on my entries, the first consistent positive feedback I'd received. Excited by this discovery, I researched summer journalism camps for high school students. I printed information about a prestigious program at Northwestern University and approached my parents during dinner. I found this journalism camp. I began sliding the papers across the table. "Mrs. Bennett thinks I have a talent for writing and this would help me develop it." My father barely glanced at the information before snorting. "Journalism, that's a dying field. Besides, if you can't figure out how to write on your own, a summer camp won't fix that." My mother frowned at the cost. "Justice, this is ridiculous. If you want to write, just write. Why do you need someone to teach you?" But Mrs. Bennett said I have potential and this program could help me develop it. I insisted. A rare moment of courage quickly extinguished. "Your teacher is paid to say nice things," my father replied. "If you were truly talented, you wouldn't need special programs." A month later, I finally gathered the courage to share some of my writing with them. I'd written a short story about a girl who discovers she can understand the language of birds, who finds wisdom in their songs that helps her navigate human problems. I handed the neatly typed pages to my parents one Sunday afternoon as they relaxed in the living room. My father skimmed it quickly, looking bored. "It's derivative. Read more original authors if you want to improve." My mother read more carefully but shook her head. "The grammar is decent, but the story lacks substance." "Is this really how you're spending your time?" I took the pages back, my hands trembling slightly. "It's just something I wrote for fun." "You should focus more on practical skills," my father advised. "Creative writing is a hobby, not a career path." As I entered high school, the social landscape became even more treacherous. When a group of girls invited me to my first party in freshman year, I asked my parents for advice on what to wear, how to act, what to expect. "Just be yourself," my mother said dismissively. "If you need coaching on how to attend a party, maybe you shouldn't go." I went wearing an outfit I guessed was appropriate and stood awkwardly in corners all night, unsure of the unwritten social rules everyone else seemed to know instinctively. Monday at school, I discovered photos of me looking uncomfortable had been shared in a group chat, accompanied by mocking comments. When my mother noticed me crying in my room that evening, she sighed from the doorway. If you were smarter about people, this wouldn't happen. You need to toughen up, Justice. By sophomore year, I developed my first serious friendship with a girl named Amanda, who shared my interest in books and writing. For 6 months, we were inseparable, passing notes in class and spending weekends at the library together. Then suddenly, Amanda stopped talking to me. I later discovered she told our entire English class that I was too intense and desperate for attention because I'd confided in her about my home life. The betrayal crushed me. When my parents found me sobbing in my bedroom, my father leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. This is what happens when you overshare, Justice. Not everyone needs to know your business. If you were more discerning about people, you wouldn't be in this situation. My mother nodded beside him. Honestly, Justice, drama follows you because you invite it. Other girls your age handle friendship problems without falling apart. Their response pushed me further into isolation. I began experiencing anxiety symptoms, my heart racing before school, my stomach churning before tests. Some mornings I would be physically sick, yet still drag myself to school, knowing that staying home would only invite more criticism. One morning, after throwing up before first period, I visited the school counselor, Mrs. Rivera. She asked gentle questions about my home life, and I gave careful answers, afraid of betraying my parents but desperate for help. Things are fine at home, I insisted. I'm just stressed about college applications coming up next year. Mrs. Rivera looked unconvinced but didn't push. Justice, my door is always open. Sometimes talking about our problems makes them easier to carry. I never returned to her office, too afraid of what might happen if my parents discovered I'd sought help. Instead, I retreated further into my dual life, the capable, independent Justice my parents demanded in public and the struggling, lonely girl I was in private. By the end of sophomore year, I made a solemn promise to myself I would never ask my parents for help again. I didn't realize then that this vow, while protective, would only deepen my isolation and prevent me from learning the difference between toxic independence and healthy interdependence. All I knew was that their mockery hurt less if I didn't give them the opportunity to deliver it. By senior year of high school, I had mastered the art of academic success through sheer determination. My GPA positioned me in the top 10% of my class. I served as editor of the school literary magazine, and I had constructed a public persona of quiet competence. But beneath this carefully crafted image, I was exhausted, running on fumes and fear. As college application season began, I watched other families tackle the process together. Parents sat with their children reviewing essay drafts, visited campuses together, and discussed financial options as partners. Meanwhile, I sat alone in my bedroom with a spreadsheet of application deadlines and requirements, figuring out how to navigate the complex process by myself. When I asked my father about our budget for application fees, he slid his credit card across the dinner table. Apply to wherever you want, but make sure you apply to state schools as safety options. We're not paying private school tuition for a degree that won't earn its keep. The subtext was clear. My education was an investment that needed to yield returns, not a path to personal growth or fulfillment. I spent hours researching scholarships and financial aid options, knowing that whatever school I attended, I would be largely responsible for financing it myself. Miss Rodriguez, my AP English teacher, noticed my exhaustion during this period. After class one day, she asked me to stay behind. "Justice, your last essay was brilliant, but you look like you haven't slept in days," she said, her eyes concerned. "Is everything okay with the college application process?" Something about her genuine concern cracked my carefully constructed facade. "I'm just doing it all myself," I admitted. "It's a lot to figure out." "Where are you applying?" she asked. "Northwestern Columbia, Boston University, NYU, UMass Amherst." I listed my voice flat with fatigue. "Journalism programs mostly." "Those are excellent schools," she nodded. "Would you like me to look over your essays? Sometimes a second pair of eyes helps." I stared at her, suspicious of the offer. "Why would you do that?" "Because you're a talented writer with important things to say," she answered simply. "And because everyone needs guidance sometimes." Miss Rodriguez became the first adult who offered me genuine help without mockery attached. Over the next few weeks, she reviewed my essays, advised me on strengthening my applications, and even helped me prepare for alumni interviews. For the first time, I experienced what supportive mentorship felt like, and it was transformative. When acceptance letters began arriving in spring, I was shocked to be admitted to all my top choices, several with partial scholarships. Northwestern's prestigious Medill School of Journalism offered me their merit scholarship covering half the tuition. When I showed my parents the acceptance package, their response was predictable but still stinging. "Don't get excited," my father cautioned, barely glancing at the letter. "Most freshmen drop out anyway. You'll probably be home by Christmas." My mother added, "It's very expensive, even with the scholarship. Are you sure this is practical? Journalism isn't exactly a growth industry." I chose Northwestern despite their discouragement, signing the acceptance forms myself since my 18th birthday had passed. That summer, I worked 2 jobs as a barista in the mornings and a retail clerk in the evenings, saving every dollar for the expenses I knew my parents wouldn't cover. When other college-bound students shopped with their parents for dorm essentials, I made solo trips to discount stores during my lunch breaks, buying the cheapest versions of everything on the recommended list. My parents fulfilled the minimum financial contribution required by the Financial Aid Office, but made it clear anything beyond tuition, room and board was my responsibility. "Consider it your first lesson in fiscal management," my father said as he wrote the check directly to the university, not trusting me with the money. Move-in day at Northwestern was overwhelming. The campus buzzed with families helping students settle into dorms, fathers assembling furniture, mothers organizing closets, tearful hugs and proud photographs. My parents dropped me at the curb with my 2 suitcases and a box of essentials. "Call us when you're settled," my mother said, not leaving the car. "And remember, this was your choice, so make it work." My roommate Zara arrived an hour later with her parents and younger sister, all carrying bags and boxes. They helped her set up her side of the room, then offered to help me with mine. I declined, politely embarrassed by my sparse belongings and the absence of my family. After her family left, Zara and I began the awkward dance of new roommates. As we unpacked, the disparities in our preparation became obvious. She had coordinated bedding, desk supplies, and wall decorations. I had basics purchased from clearance racks. When she offered to share her mini fridge, I accepted gratefully, having been unable to afford one. The differences extended beyond material possessions. When Zara wanted to do laundry our first weekend, she discovered I didn't know how to operate the machines. "You've never done laundry before?" she asked, surprised. "Not really," I admitted, embarrassed. My mother always said I did it wrong, so she just did it herself. Zara taught me without judgment, showing me how to separate colors and use the correct settings. Later that week, when I struggled to set up my student banking account, she helped with that too. Slowly, I realized how many basic adult skills my parents had never taught me, expecting me to somehow know them instinctively or figure them out alone. The first semester was a brutal adjustment. I balanced a work-study job in the library with a full course load and the steep learning curve of basic adult functioning. While other freshmen called home for advice on dealing with difficult professors or navigating roommate conflicts, I solved every problem alone, afraid that any call home would be met with mockery rather than support. Midterms brought my first major crisis. The night before my journalism ethics paper was due, my laptop screen went black and refused to restart. Hours of work were trapped in a machine I couldn't access with no backup copies. In desperation, I called home. "Dad, my laptop died and I have a major paper due tomorrow," I explained quickly. "I need help getting a replacement fast. Could you help me figure out how to get one delivered overnight or transfer some money so I can buy one locally?" His laugh came through the phone line, as familiar as it was painful. "Already failing just like we predicted." "Maybe this will teach you a lesson about preparation and responsibility." "I'm not failing," I said, my voice shaking. "I just need a computer to submit my work." "Well, figure it out," he replied dismissively. "This is exactly why we said college might not be for you. First obstacle and you're calling home crying." I hung up my hands, trembling. In the stairwell of my dorm, I sank to the floor, unable to breathe through the panic attack gripping my chest. In that moment, I truly believed my father was right. I wasn't capable. I wasn't prepared. I would fail just as they had always predicted. Years of their messaging crashed over me like a wave, drowning my fragile self-confidence. I sat alone, hyperventilating, certain that this was the end of my college career before it had truly begun. As I sat in the stairwell, tears gradually subsiding, something shifted inside me. The panic receded, replaced by a strange, calm clarity. In that moment of rock bottom, I realized a fundamental truth. My parents would never be the support system I needed. They would never celebrate my successes without qualification or help me through failures without judgment. This was not a temporary phase or a misunderstanding that would eventually resolve. This was who they were. I faced a choice: drop out and prove them right, or find another way forward. For the first time, I saw with perfect clarity that continuing to seek their approval and support was a path to guaranteed disappointment. If I wanted to succeed, I would need to build a different foundation. As this realization settled over me, the stairwell door opened and Zara appeared, concern etched on her face. "Justice, are you okay? I've been looking everywhere for you." I wiped my face with my sleeve. "My laptop died." All my work for Professor Wilson's class is on it. Instead of offering platitudes or dismissing the problem, Zara sat beside me. That's awful. What do you need right now? The question startled me. No one had ever asked what I needed before. I need to submit my paper by tomorrow at noon, I said, but I can't afford a new laptop right now. You can use mine tonight to rewrite what you can, she offered immediately. And my brother works at the tech store downtown. He might be able to recover your data tomorrow. I stared at her, confused by the straightforward offer of help without mockery attached. Why would you do that? You have your own work. Because that's what friends do, she said simply. They help each other. Back in our dorm room, as I worked on Zara's laptop, rewriting my paper from memory, she mentioned something that would change my perspective forever. You know, Justice, the way your parents treat you isn't normal, she said carefully. My parents would never laugh at me for needing help, especially not in an emergency. They just want me to be independent. I defend it automatically. There's a difference between encouraging independence and refusing to support your child, she replied. My parents taught me to do things for myself, but they were there when I needed backup. That's normal. What your parents do isn't. Her words lingered in my mind long after I'd finished rewriting my paper. The next morning, Zara's brother was able to recover most of my data, charging me a fraction of the normal price. When I tried to thank him profusely, he waved it off. No big deal. We all need help sometimes. A week later, I found myself sitting in the waiting room of Northwestern's Counseling and Psychological Services, having finally taken Zara's advice to talk to someone. The intake form asked about family history, and I hesitated, unsure how to describe my upbringing without seeming ungrateful or dramatic. I finally wrote, parents emphasized extreme self-sufficiency. Dr. Morgan, the therapist assigned to me, was a soft-spoken woman in her 50s with kind eyes that missed nothing. In our first session, she listened as I carefully described my parents' approach to children. They just have high expectations, I explained. They wanted me to be independent. Independence is certainly a valuable trait, she acknowledged. But I'm curious about something, Justice, in your family. What happened when you needed help with something? I described several instances of asking for help and being met with mockery or dismissal. With each example, Dr. Morgan nodded thoughtfully. What you're describing sounds like a pattern of emotional neglect, possibly emotional abuse, she said gently. Parents have a responsibility not just to ensure their children can function independently, but to provide emotional support and guidance. I flinched at the term abuse. That seems extreme. They never hit me or anything. Emotional abuse can be harder to identify than physical abuse, but it's no less damaging, Dr. Morgan explained. Consistently mocking a child for normal needs, withdrawing support as punishment, and setting impossible standards are forms of emotional abuse. I left that first session deeply unsettled. Could my entire understanding of parent-child relationships be fundamentally wrong? Over the next few weeks, Dr. Morgan helped me identify patterns I had never questioned. We discussed the difference between healthy independence, which includes knowing when and how to seek help, and toxic self-sufficiency, which prevents connection and growth. One rainy Saturday, I sat in a coffee shop near campus with a blank notebook. Dr. Morgan had suggested I create a support inventory, identifying people and resources I could trust. At the top of the page, I wrote support system and then stared at the empty lines below. After several minutes, I wrote Zara and Dr. Morgan. I hesitated, then added Miss Rodriguez, though she was hundreds of miles away. 3 names on a page that should have started with Mom and Dad. Beneath the names, I began listing specific areas where I needed support. Academic guidance, financial planning, career advice, emotional support, practical life skills. Next to each area, I brainstormed resources available at Northwestern or in the wider community, academic advisors, financial aid counselors, career services, student groups. On the next page, I drafted my first independent life plan. I outlined goals for the remainder of freshman year, summer, and beyond. I researched paid internships that would build my journalism experience while providing income. I found campus workshops on life skills like budgeting, time management, and conflict resolution. I investigated scholarships that might reduce my financial dependence on my parents. With trembling hands, I added one more item to my plan: minimal contact with parents during academic year. It felt both terrifying and liberating to write those words. That week, I joined the staff of the student newspaper as a freshman reporter. The newsroom became my sanctuary, a place where asking questions was not just permitted, but required. The editor-in-chief, Madison Williams, took an interest in my work and began providing the kind of mentorship I had always craved. She edited my articles with constructive criticism, taught me interviewing techniques, and included me in staff meetings despite my junior status. You have a natural talent for finding the human angle in stories, she told me after my first feature was published. Keep developing that and you'll go far in this field. When winter break approached, I faced a decision. Return home for 3 weeks of subtle criticism and isolation or find an alternative. Zara, seeing my anxiety, offered a solution. Come home with me, she said. My family has plenty of room and they already said it's fine. My mom actually suggested it. Telling my parents I wouldn't be coming home was one of the hardest phone calls I'd ever made. My mother's hurt silence and my father's cold suit yourself stayed with me for days afterward. But the alternative, spending the holidays with Zara's family in Michigan, showed me what I'd been missing my entire life. The Ahmed's home was warm, chaotic, and loving. Disagreements happened openly, but resolved with apologies and compromise. Questions were welcomed, not mocked. When I offered to help with dinner preparation, and admitted I didn't know how to cook many things, Zara's mother spent an afternoon teaching me family recipes. Laughing at mistakes and praising small successes. Everyone has to learn sometime, she said when I apologized for my clumsiness with the knife. No one is born knowing how to chop onions. Returning to campus after break, I felt simultaneously lighter and more grounded. For the first time, I had experienced what healthy family dynamics could look like. I had seen an alternative to the cold perfection of my childhood home. Most importantly, I had begun to understand that my struggles were not character flaws, but normal human experiences that deserved compassion rather than contempt. I reduced contact with my parents to brief information, only phone calls once every 2 weeks. Each call left me anxious and doubting, but each time I recovered more quickly. I focused on building connections with professors, classmates, and mentors who respected my contributions without demanding perfection. By the end of freshman year, I had not only passed all my classes but excelled in my journalism courses. I had secured a position as a staff writer at the newspaper for the following year. I had learned to do my own laundry, manage a simple budget, and cook basic meals. Most importantly, I had begun to believe that perhaps my parents had been wrong about me all along. Perhaps I wasn't fundamentally flawed or incapable. Perhaps I could build myself without them tearing me down. 2 years later, as a junior at Northwestern, I barely recognized the terrified freshman I had once been. Through consistent therapy, hard work, and the gradual building of healthy relationships, I had transformed into someone I could be proud of. My academic transcript showed a consistent pattern of Dean's List semesters. My role at the Daily Northwestern had expanded from staff writer to features editor. My portfolio contained pieces that had won regional collegiate journalism awards. During sophomore year, I had developed a specialized beat covering mental health resources on campus. Inspired by my own experiences, my investigative series on the inadequacies of university counseling services had prompted administrative review and increased funding. More importantly, it had given voice to other students struggling silently as I once had. The social confidence that had eluded me throughout childhood began to develop naturally as I formed genuine friendships based on mutual interests and support rather than proximity or convenience. I learned that friendship wasn't a performance of perfection, but a genuine exchange of strengths and vulnerabilities. When I struggled with an assignment or personal problem, I practiced asking trusted friends for perspective. Each successful request helping to rewrite my internal narrative about needing help. Professor Walsh, a former Chicago Tribune investigative reporter who taught advanced journalism, became a particularly important mentor. After reading my mental health series, she invited me to her office hours to discuss my career goals. You have a rare ability to handle sensitive topics with both compassion and journalistic integrity, she told me. Where do you see yourself after graduation? I admitted that while I loved traditional newspaper reporting, I was increasingly interested in digital media platforms that allowed for multimedia storytelling and broader reach. Have you considered applying for the Lent Digital Media Internship in New York next summer? She asked. It's highly competitive, but your portfolio is strong, and I think you'd be a good fit for their approach. When I hesitated, citing the cost of living in New York, Professor Walsh mentioned that the internship was paid and included housing assistance. Before I could formulate another objection, she smiled knowingly. Justice, I've been teaching for 15 years, and I've learned to recognize exceptional talent. You have it. The only question is whether you're going to let yourself pursue opportunities worthy of your abilities. Her words struck directly at the core belief my parents had instilled that I wasn't capable, that aiming high would inevitably lead to failure and mockery. In that moment, I made a decision to prove that belief wrong once and for all. I'd like to apply, I said firmly. Would you be willing to write a recommendation? Professor Walsh not only wrote the recommendation, but helped me select portfolio pieces that showcased my best work. When the application deadline approached, she reviewed my materials one final time. Remember, she advised, speak about your work with confidence, not arrogance, but the earned confidence of someone who has put in the hours and produced quality journalism. You belong in this competition. The interview for the Lent internship took place over video conference in February. I prepared meticulously, researching the company's recent projects and practicing answers to potential questions. When the interview began, I forced myself to maintain eye contact with the camera and speak clearly about my work, fighting the instinct to minimize my accomplishments. Your investigative series on campus mental health services is impressive, the interviewer commented. What prompted your interest in that topic? I took a deep breath and gave an honest answer. I believe journalism at its best gives voice to those who aren't being heard. Mental health stigma silences too many students, and inadequate resources compound the problem. I wanted to create change through thorough, compassionate reporting. 2 weeks later, I received the email I had hardly allowed myself to hope for. I had been selected for the internship. The position would start in June and continue for 10 weeks, providing a stipend and shared housing in a company apartment. It was the professional opportunity of a lifetime and validation that my work had merit beyond the campus bubble. That evening I did something I rarely did anymore. I called my parents with news I was excited about. Some small persistent part of me still hoped for their approval, still believed they might eventually recognize my growth and achievements. I got the Lent digital media internship in New York for the summer. I told my mother, unable to keep the pride from my voice. It's really competitive. Only 6 students nationwide are selected. New York is very expensive, she replied after a pause. Are you sure that's practical? It's paid with housing included, I explained. And it's one of the most prestigious internships in digital journalism. Well, I hope it works out, she said, her tone suggesting she expected the opposite. Your father says to remind you that internships rarely lead to actual jobs, so don't get your hopes up. I ended the call shortly afterward, disappointed, but no longer devastated by their response. Their opinion, I realized, no longer had the power to determine my self-worth. It was merely one perspective, and increasingly not the one that mattered most to me. The summer in New York transformed my professional trajectory. The Lent Media Group operated at the cutting edge of digital journalism, combining traditional reporting with innovative multimedia storytelling. My supervisor, Alicia Ramirez, quickly recognized my work ethic and assigned me to increasingly significant projects. You have a rare combination of technical skill and emotional intelligence, she told me during my midpoint review. Your piece on community responses to healthcare disparities showed remarkable nuance for someone at your career stage. Under Alicia's guidance, I developed expertise in data visualization, podcast production, and long-form digital storytelling. I absorbed everything the environment offered, staying late to help with projects outside my assigned tasks, volunteering for challenging assignments others avoided. 2 weeks before the internship ended, Alicia invited me to coffee outside the office. We've been impressed with your work this summer, she said. I wanted to let you know informally that we'd like to offer you a position after graduation, assuming your senior year goes as expected. I nearly spilled my coffee in shock. A real position, not another internship. She smiled. A junior digital producer role on our investigative team. The formal offer will come later, but I wanted you to be able to plan your senior year accordingly. I returned to Northwestern for my final year with a job offer in hand and a clear post-graduation path. For the first time, I felt secure in my professional future, confident that the foundation I had built would support the next phase of my life. My senior year brought new opportunities for growth and leadership. As editor-in-chief of the campus paper, I mentored younger journalists, particularly those who, like me, lacked traditional support systems. I recognized in their uncertainty and overcompensation the patterns I had lived through, and I became the guide I had so desperately needed. Asking questions doesn't mean you're not smart enough, I told a freshman reporter who apologized for needing clarification on an assignment. It means you're smart enough to know what you don't know yet. In therapy, I continued working through the complex emotions surrounding my parents. Dr. Morgan helped me understand that their behavior likely stemmed from their own insecurities and limited emotional capacity, not from any inherent flaw in me. You can acknowledge the harm they caused while also recognizing they were operating from their own wounded places. She explained that doesn't excuse their behavior, but it might help you release some of the anger that's weighing you down. Gradually, I developed healthier boundaries and greater emotional freedom. I no longer measured my worth by my parents' impossible standards. I learned to celebrate my accomplishments without needing external validation, and to view setbacks as learning opportunities rather than confirmations of inadequacy. My senior project, a multimedia examination of first-generation college students navigating elite institutions without family support, won the school's annual journalism award. More importantly, it connected me with other students who had walked similar paths, creating a community of shared experience and mutual support. As graduation approached, I received confirmation of my job offer from Lent Media, a starting salary that would allow me financial independence, comprehensive benefits, and the opportunity to work with some of the most respected names, digital journalism. I signed the contract without consulting my parents, a small act of autonomy that represented years of internal work. The night before graduation, I gathered with friends who had become my chosen family. Zara, who would be starting medical school in the fall, Madison, my predecessor at the newspaper, who had returned for my graduation, Professor Walsh, and several other mentors who had guided me through the years. As we celebrated our achievements and shared memories, I realized I had built something precious and sustaining a network of people who valued me not for perfection, but for precisely who I was, complexities and all. To Justice, Zara toasted, raising her glass, who taught me that resilience isn't just about enduring, but about building something beautiful from what you've endured. I blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the journey from that panic attack in the stairwell to this moment of genuine connection and accomplishment. I had not only survived, I had flourished. Graduation day dawned bright and clear, the Northwestern campus transformed by white chairs and fluttering banners. As I donned my cap and gown, I felt a complex mixture of pride, accomplishment, and apprehension. My parents had arrived the previous evening, staying at a hotel near campus. Our dinner together had been cordial but strained, marked by their subtle dismissals of my achievements and passive-aggressive comments about the expense of my education. The Medill School of Journalism ceremony recognized the top graduates with special honors. When my name was called as recipient of the Edward R. Murrow Award for Excellence in Digital Journalism, I walked across the stage with my head high, accepting the certificate and medal from the dean. From my position on stage, I could see my parents in the audience, my father checking his watch, my mother clapping politely, but looking uncomfortable with the public recognition of my success. After the ceremony, we navigated the crowds of celebrating families toward the designated photo areas. Other parents hugged their graduates' voices loud with pride and affection. My father stood stiffly beside me for the obligatory photographs, while my mother fussed with my cap, more concerned with appearances than connection. "Well, you made it through," my father said, his tone suggesting mild surprise rather than pride. "Now comes the real test in the working world. The job market is very competitive these days," my mother added. "Even with your internship connection, you should probably have backup plans." I smiled tightly, having anticipated their inability to offer unqualified congratulations. "Actually, I've already accepted a position with Lent Media Group in New York. I start in 3 weeks. Entry level, I assume," my father asked. "Those rarely pay enough to live comfortably in New York. It's a junior producer role on their investigative team," I corrected. "The salary is competitive with benefits." My mother looked surprised. "Well, that's fortunate. Though New York is still terribly expensive, you'll probably need roommates." I chose not to mention that my starting salary was higher than I had expected, or that I had already been researching studio apartments within my budget. Some information was still safer kept to myself. 2 years passed quickly in the fast-paced world of digital media. At 24, I had established myself as a rising talent at Lent, contributing to award-winning investigative projects and developing expertise in data-driven storytelling. My personal life had stabilized as well, with a small but solid circle of friends and a growing confidence in social situations. The promotion to senior editor came after our team's investigation into pharmaceutical pricing won a National Journalism Award. My new role included managing a team of writers and producers, significantly increasing my responsibilities and compensation. The accompanying salary increase allowed me to finally pay off my student loans and begin saving for a down payment on an apartment. 6 months after my promotion, I found a small but charming 1-bedroom apartment in a diverse, vibrant neighborhood. The building was a renovated brownstone with original details and modern amenities. The purchase process was intimidating, but with guidance from a patient realtor and financial advisor, I navigated the complexities of New York real estate and became a first-time homeowner. As I painted walls, installed bookshelves, and gradually furnished the space with carefully chosen pieces, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This was more than an apartment. It was tangible proof of my independence and success. A space that was entirely mine, created through my own efforts. When the apartment was finally arranged to my satisfaction, a thought I had been avoiding surfaced clearly. I wanted my parents to see it. Not because I needed their approval, but because I wanted them to witness the reality of what I had built without their support. After discussing the complex emotions involved with my therapist, I decided to invite them to visit. The phone call was predictably awkward. "I'd like to invite you to visit me in New York," I said, cutting through the usual small talk. "I've bought an apartment and settled into my new role at work. I thought you might like to see both." After a surprised pause, my mother responded, "That would be nice, Justice. We've been wondering what your life is like there." We arranged for them to visit the following month, scheduling a weekend when I could take time to show them my neighborhood and office. In the weeks leading up to their visit, I prepared mentally with my therapist, setting boundaries and managing expectations. "Remember, you're inviting them to witness your life, not to judge or approve it." Dr. Lavin, my New York therapist, reminded me, "Their opinions reflect their limitations, not your value." The day of their arrival, I cleaned my already immaculate apartment and prepared a simple welcome basket with local specialties. When they knocked on my door, I took a deep, centering breath before opening it. My parents stood in the hallway looking slightly out of place. My father in his business casual attire, my mother in a carefully coordinated outfit more suited to a Boston suburb than a New York neighborhood. They had aged since graduation, Maury gray in their hair, more lines around their eyes. "Welcome to New York," I said, stepping aside to let them enter. "The neighborhood seems interesting," my mother commented, her tone making it clear interesting wasn't entirely positive. "We passed some unusual shops on the way from the hotel. It's very diverse," I explained. "That's what I love about it." My father surveyed the apartment with a critical eye. "Rather small for what I imagine you paid. Real estate in New York is highway robbery." "I got a good deal actually," I replied calmly. "The market was favorable when I bought, and my mortgage payment is less than most rents in the area." As I showed them around, they continued making subtle criticisms disguised as observations. The kitchen was compact rather than efficient. The bathroom fixtures were unusual rather than charming. The street noise was constant rather than energetic. I served coffee and pastries from my favorite local bakery, maintaining pleasantries while inwardly counting the hours until this part of their visit would end. The real test would come the following day when I took them to my office. Friday morning, I met my parents at their hotel and escorted them to the Lent Media headquarters in a renovated industrial building in Chelsea. As we entered the sleek lobby with its digital displays showcasing recent projects, I felt a surge of pride in my professional home. Justice called Marcus, our receptionist. "You're 11, 30 got pushed to 1, but Alicia wants you to stop by when you have a moment. She has the draft for the Philadelphia project." "Thanks, Marcus," I smiled. "These are my parents, Thomas and Diane Lane. They're visiting from Boston." "Welcome to Lent," Marcus beamed. "Your daughter is our rising star." The whole team fought over who got her when she came on board. My father nodded stiffly while my mother offered a thin smile. I led them through the open concept workspace where writers, producers, and designers collaborated on multimedia projects. Colleagues waved or called greetings as we passed, several stopping to chat briefly or compliment recent work. "This is my office," I said, showing them into a glass-walled space with views of the workspace and the city beyond. My desk displayed 2 journalism awards, and the walls featured framed covers of our most significant investigative pieces, including several with my byline. "It's very open," my mother observed. "Don't you find it distracting?" "I like being connected to the energy of the team," I explained. "When I need quiet focus time, I book one of the meditation rooms." Alicia knocked on my open door, tablet in hand. "Sorry to interrupt your family time, Justice, but I wanted to introduce myself." She stepped forward to shake my parents' hands. "Alicia Ramirez, executive producer. I've had the pleasure of working with your daughter since she interned with us." "Justice mentioned she's been promoted," my father said, his tone suggesting skepticism. Alicia smiled warmly more than once. "Justice is one of our most valuable team members. Her investigative series on healthcare accessibility won a national award last year, and she's mentoring several of our newer producers. We have big plans for her future here." I watched my parents' faces as Alicia spoke, noting their struggle to reconcile her praise with their long-held belief in my inadequacy. They looked almost confused, as if hearing about a stranger rather than their daughter. After touring the office, I took my parents to dinner at an upscale restaurant I could now comfortably afford. As we were seated at a table overlooking the city lights, I felt a strange, calm certainty. This moment, this conversation had been inevitable since the day I decided to build a life without their approval. After we ordered, I sat down my water glass and looked directly at them. I want to talk about why I really invited you here. My father frowned slightly. I assumed you wanted to show off your accomplishments. Not exactly, I said. I wanted you to see the reality of what I've built because it contradicts everything you told me about myself growing up. My mother shifted uncomfortably. I'm not sure what you mean, Justice. I think you do, I continued calmly. From my earliest memories, you both responded to any request for help or guidance with mockery and dismissal. When I struggled with multiplication tables, you laughed and said I'd never survive the real world. When I asked for help with college applications, you predicted I'd drop out by Christmas. When my laptop died before a crucial assignment and I called home desperate for help, you said it proved I wasn't college material. My father's face hardened. We were teaching you independence. Clearly it worked. No, I said firmly. What you taught me was that I was fundamentally flawed for having normal human needs. What you did wasn't teaching independence. It was emotional neglect at best, emotional abuse at worst. That's ridiculous, my mother protested, glancing around as if worried someone might overhear. We provided everything you needed except emotional support. Accept guidance, accept the basic kindness most parents offer their children, I replied, keeping my voice steady. I built this life without a single hand from you. Every time you said I couldn't, I proved I could, not because of your approach but despite it. My father attempted to regain control of the conversation. You're being dramatic. Our parenting style clearly worked. Look at what you've accomplished. I accomplished this because other people showed me what healthy support looks like. I corrected him. My roommate who taught me basic life skills you never bothered to show me. My professors who mentored me professionally without mockery. My therapist who helped me understand that your treatment wasn't normal or justified. My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances, my father's face flushing with anger. My mother's paling with something that might have been shame. Neither could meet my eyes. We always wanted what was best for you. My mother said weakly. You wanted what was easiest for you, I replied. Supporting a child emotionally is hard work. It requires patience and empathy. It was easier to mock me for needing help than to actually provide it. My father attempted one last defense. We raised you to be self-sufficient and look at you now, successful, independent. Our methods clearly worked. No, I said with quiet certainty. I am successful and independent in spite of your methods, not because of them. And I've learned something you never taught me true. Independence isn't about never needing help. It's about knowing when to seek support and having the courage to ask for it. The remainder of the meal passed in strained silence. My parents looked shell-shocked, unable to maintain their usual facade of superiority. As we waited for the check, my father stared out at the city lights, his profile rigid with unspoken anger. My mother folded and refolded her napkin, her eyes downcast. When we parted outside the restaurant, there were no warm embraces or promises to stay in touch. My father shook my hand formally as if concluding a business meeting. My mother attempted a hug that felt hollow and performative. Safe travels tomorrow, I said politely. I have a work commitment in the morning, so this is goodbye for now. As they turned to hail a taxi, I noticed something I had never seen before, the slight stoop in my father's shoulders, the uncertainty in my mother's step. They looked smaller, somehow diminished by the truth I had finally spoken aloud. Their faces had turned ashen, unable to maintain the fiction they had built around their parenting. Walking back to my apartment alone, I felt not the triumph I might have imagined, but a profound sense of release. I had finally spoken my truth, not in anger or revenge, but in simple, undeniable fact. I no longer needed them to acknowledge their failures or apologize for the pain they had caused. I had stopped waiting for the parents I deserved and accepted the reality of the parents I had. In that acceptance came a freedom I had never known before, a final loosening of chains I had carried for too long. I had built a life they could not diminish or claim credit for. I had become someone they could no longer make feel small. The little girl who had cried silently over multiplication tables had grown into a woman who could speak her truth without trembling. The weeks following my parents' visit brought an unexpected emotional aftermath. After years of therapy and personal growth, I had anticipated feeling liberated after our confrontation. Instead, I experienced a complex emptiness, a grief for the relationship we had never had and now likely never would. Dr. Lavin helped me understand this was a normal part of the process. You're mourning the parents you deserved, but never had she explained. That's a profound loss, even if you've already done the work of accepting it intellectually. Gradually, the emptiness gave way to a deeper sense of peace. I had spoken my truth without anger or vindictiveness, simply stating the reality of my experience. Whether my parents ever fully acknowledged that reality was beyond my control and increasingly beyond my concern, our contact became limited but less tense. I called on holidays and their birthdays, keeping conversations brief and focused on current events rather than personal matters. They did the same, maintaining the facade of normal family relations without addressing the fundamental brokenness beneath. It wasn't healing exactly, but it was a truce I could live with. As my professional life continued to flourish, I found unexpected fulfillment in mentoring younger colleagues, particularly those from challenging family backgrounds. Recognizing my own past struggles in their self-doubt and perfectionism, I created an informal support program for new journalists joining our team. Success in this field isn't just about talent or technical skills, I told a group of interns during an orientation session. It's about building resilience and knowing when to seek guidance. No one does this work entirely alone, nor should they. At 27, I was promoted to managing editor, overseeing a team of 15 journalists and producers. The role challenged me to develop new leadership skills, balancing high standards with the supportive approach I wished I had received in my formative years. My team's projects consistently garnered industry recognition, including a prestigious award for a series investigating inequities in urban health care systems. Outside of work, I continued building a rich personal life. I developed close friendships with people who shared my values and interests, creating the chosen family I had begun assembling in college. I explored new hobbies, discovering a passion for urban gardening that transformed my small apartment balcony into a green oasis. I began dating Michael, a kind and thoughtful architect who approached relationships with the healthy communication I had worked so hard to learn. 3 years after our confrontation dinner, my father called on a random Tuesday evening. Surprised by the unexpected contact, I answered with caution. "Justice," he began, his voice unusually hesitant. "I saw your health care series was nominated for the Peabody Award. That's impressive." The awkward compliment, free from qualifications or dismissals, caught me off guard. "Thank you," I replied simply. "Your mother and I watched the preview segment online," he continued. "The way you presented the data while keeping the human element central was it was excellent work." I sat in stunned silence, unprepared for what seemed to be genuine praise from a man who had never offered it before. "Anyway," he concluded awkwardly, "we just wanted you to know we saw it and we're proud." The word hung in the air between us, unfamiliar and fragile. I chose to accept it at face value, neither questioning his sincerity nor overinvesting in its significance. "I appreciate that," I said. "It was a team effort, but I'm proud of how it turned out too." The conversation ended shortly thereafter, but something had shifted almost imperceptibly. It wasn't reconciliation or forgiveness, but perhaps the first acknowledgement that I existed as a separate successful person whose achievements could no longer be diminished or dismissed. The following year, I developed a feature series examining emotional abuse within families, focusing on survivors who had built meaningful lives despite limited support systems. The project combined data analysis with powerful personal narratives, giving voice to experiences often minimized or misunderstood. Emotional abuse leaves no visible scars. I wrote in the introduction, but its impact on development, self-worth, and future relationships can be profound and lasting. Recovery begins with naming the experience and understanding its effects. Continues with building new patterns of self-compassion and healthy relationships, and flourishes in creating a life defined by one's own values, rather than the limitations imposed by others. The series resonated deeply, with readers generating thousands of comments and emails from people who recognized their own experiences in the stories. I received invitations to speak at conferences and universities about both the journalistic approach and the subject matter itself. My personal experience, transformed into professional expertise, became a platform for helping others name and heal from similar wounds. As my public profile grew, I remained selective about which parts of my personal story to share. In one panel discussion at a journalism conference, a student asked what had drawn me to cover emotional abuse so effectively. "I believe our most powerful reporting often comes from the questions we needed answered ourselves," I replied carefully. "Sometimes our wounds, when properly processed and understood, become windows through which we can see others' pain more clearly." With time and continued personal work, I came to understand my parents' behavior not as a reflection of my worth, but as a manifestation of their own limitations. Their approach to parenting likely stemmed from how they had been raised themselves, perpetuating patterns they lacked the awareness or capacity to break. This understanding didn't excuse their actions, but helped me contextualize them within a larger family history. Most profound lesson I learned through my journey was that true independence isn't achieved through isolation or perfect self-sufficiency. Real independence comes from knowing when to seek support, having the discernment to identify trustworthy sources of guidance, and maintaining healthy boundaries that allow for both connection and autonomy. I no longer carried the weight of trying to earn love that should have been freely given. I had stopped internalizing my parents' messages about my capabilities and worth. Most importantly, I had broken the cycle, ensuring that any children in my future would experience the consistent support and encouragement I had lacked. In every mentoring relationship, every friendship, every romantic connection, I made a conscious choice to be the person I needed when I was younger. Someone who offered guidance without mockery, who celebrated successes without qualification, who understood that showing vulnerability requires more courage than hiding it. My story isn't about perfect healing or dramatic reconciliation. It's about the quiet, consistent work of building a meaningful life on my own terms, brick by patient brick. It's about learning that family can be chosen as well as born, that worth isn't earned through achievement but inherent in existence, that the people who mock your struggles may never understand your journey. But when you build yourself with your own hands, no one can take away what you've created. And sometimes the most powerful response to those who said you couldn't is not resentment or revenge, but living well and extending to others the compassion you wish you had received. Has anyone in your life ever underestimated what you could achieve on your own? How did you prove them wrong? And what did you learn about yourself in the process? Share your story in the comments below and subscribe if this resonated with you. Remember that your journey matters and deserves to be honored whether others recognize its value or not. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep building your life on your own terms, one brick at a time. Music.